Ever since they announced Regulation J in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which introduces mythicals onto the in-game ladder, everyone's been asking me what my opinion is on different mythicals, so I figured I would just knock them all out at once and make a tier list. So here you go. Enjoy. So for this tier list, I am going to be ranking these in a competitive setting and through the scope of actual Reg J, which is the in-game ladder, which only allows you to have either one mythical and one restricted, 2 restricteds and no mythicals, or 2 mythicals and no restricteds. So the mythicals do take a restricted slot. So keeping that in mind, that is how we're going to rank all of these today. I also went ahead and took out all the ones that are just not in Scarlet and Violet, which are all the ones at the bottom. I know Meloetta is in Scarlet and Violet, but why does she need 2 pictures? We'll talk about her 2 forms at the same time. But we are going to be starting off with one of my favorite Pokemon, which is Mew. Mew's really cool because it can learn every TM move in the game. So realistically, you could give it whatever set of moves you'd like. The possibilities are literally endless. You can Tailwind with Mew, you can Trick Room with Mew, so if you wanted to run a Tailwind team, you could do that. It also gets support moves. You could always run support Mew with things like Knock Off, Will-O-Wisp, Snarl, Screens, or if you wanted to actually hit with it, it also has access to a ton of offensive moves. So like I said, realistically with Mew, the possibilities are kind of endless. But like I said, since these do take a restricted slot, what is Mew doing that other restricteds that are currently in the format are not already doing? For example, you could make Mew bulky, or you could make him an expanding force user if you wanted to go offensive, but then when we're looking at the mythicals, there's also Deoxys, who also is able to run Expanding Force, and probably does a better job at it. So at the end of the day, more than likely, you would want to run a bulky supportive Mew, right? But the thing is, since he's taking up a whole restricted slot, do you really want to use an entire restricted slot on a support Pokemon? Especially when there is already established support Pokemon that get a lot of the moves that you would want Mew to run. So Mew's not a bad Pokemon per se, but it's not a premier choice, especially since it's taking up such a vital spot on the team. So for that reason, I am gonna be putting Mew at D tier. It simply falls victim to taking up a restricted slot when other Pokemon could do the same job without having to sacrifice that spot. Now the next Pokemon is also one of my favorites. It's Jirachi. Now the thing with Jirachi is that Jirachi just doesn't have a lot of options. More than likely, you're gonna want to give it a Scarf and run Iron Head for the 60% flinch rate, and then probably another Steel Stab move like Meteor Mash, which would boost attack at a 40% rate, Zen Headbutt, which is flinching at a 40% rate, and maybe some type of coverage move like Fire Punch or Ice Punch. Realistically, you could also run Drain Punch, but Intimidate Incineroar exists, so it's not really going to be doing a lot. You could also try and run Clear Amulet on it if you did want to try to avoid Intimidate, but then you wouldn't have the speed advantage that you would get from a Choice Scarf, which is of course what would allow you to outspeed your opponents and then get those flinches. And unfortunately, its offensive stab typing just isn't great, and you kind of have to stick to one particular set in order to make Jirachi usable. You could also try to do a whole Power Herb Meteor Beam set, kind of like Lunala, but then would you really want to run Jirachi over Lunala for something like that? Probably not. So you could probably slot Jirachi into a team somewhere, but it's still kind of like Mew, it's just not the best choice. So it is gonna join Mew in D tier. I'm ranking the next 2 together because they are pretty much doing the same thing, and that is Deoxys base form and Deoxys attack form. And those bad boys are gonna go ahead and go into B tier. And what I mean by they're both doing the same thing is that both of them are basically going to be paired with Indeedee for Psychic Terrain and running Expanding Force like I mentioned earlier. You're also more than likely going to be wanting to run Dark Pulse on both of them, just because you are speed tying with Calyrex Shadow Rider with both of these forms. You'll probably want Protect on them as well since you are going to be on the frailer side, and because of that, you probably want to run the Focus Sash item as well. It's not their fault that their defenses aren't great. But since this is going to be a ladder meta, pairing a Terra Psychic Expanding Force using Deoxys next to a Helping Hand Indeedee is going to pack up quite a few teams, especially if they're not expecting it, which is probably one of my favorite things to do, and I did it with my Delphox. So I may or may not be doing that with Deoxys as well. Stay tuned. What's cool about that specific pairing as well is that you do also avoid getting extreme speeded by all of the Arceuses that you're inevitably going to see on the ladder as well, thanks to your ever so lovely psychic terrain. But that also means that you're definitely going to find yourself in terrain wars, because you already know Miraidon's also not going anywhere. This also opens options for things like Meteor Beam, since you do have Follow Me to avoid your Deoxys getting hit by anything. That's not a spread move, of course. It would also open up the option for something like Psycho Boost even, if you're trying to get rid of something quickly, which would definitely just clear whatever it's targeting into on psychic terrain, all while Indeedee keeping Deoxys safe. But what I'm getting at clearly is that those two paired together can do some big damage, as long as you find a way to deal with any opposing Dark-type Pokemon. Now, I will say that not all Deoxys forms were created equal, because the next Deoxys form that we're going to cover is the defense form. I'm not even going to be shy about this one. This one's going in F tier. For starters, its niche is very small, and that niche is Leftovers, Cosmic Power, Stored Power, and Recover. Basically, it's like Eternastall. You all know how I feel about stall teams. But yeah, defense form Deoxys literally just wants to live everything and stall out the timer. The tragic thing is that it doesn't get access to Toxic, so you can't even Toxic stall to make things go a little quicker. It does get Knockoff, which is nice, into any opposing Ghost types or Psychic types, but realistically, defense form Deoxys isn't a very offensive threat, especially since Dark-type Pokemon kind of eat up defense form Deoxys, since, like I said, it's not hitting very hard. It just kind of gets hit. And something that I know all too well, because I'm me and my RNG hates me, is that the longer that you're on the field, the higher the likelihood that you're gonna be crit. So even if you are the bulkiest of bulk on the field, one crit could literally ruin your entire plan of stalling out the game. Nobody ever expects the crit, but when it hits, it's always at the worst time. You could also maybe try to run like Calm Mind and Store Power in an attempt to do a little bit more damage, but at the end of the day, when things like Incineroar exist and Calyrex Shadow Rider, which you're both very weak to, it definitely doesn't seem like an ideal choice, or a choice at all. But don't worry, defense form Deoxys won't be lonely in F tier, because its sibling, Speed Deoxys, is joining it. Now listen, I understand that Speed form Deoxys is faster than every single thing in the game that's not named Regieleki, and also has access to Icy Wind, so it can make its opponents even slower. But you know what's sad? Is that it's still not outspeeding Booster Speed Flutter, which also has Icy Wind, or Booster Speed Iron Bundle, which also has Icy Wind. There's also Sucker Punch, and Tailwind. And if you just so happen to find yourself in Trick Room, you're also not living there either, because you're frail. And unfortunately, the speed really is the only thing that this one has going for it, because your offense is not there either. I'm just not really sure that speed is what you would be picking for Deoxys at the end of the day. I mean, maybe your opponent will think that you're running Attack Deoxys, and then you still wouldn't really benefit from that because of everything I just said, but you know, maybe it would trick them for a second. So at least there's two Deoxyses that can keep each other company in F tier. Now, Phione is an interesting Pokemon. I am gonna go ahead and put it in C tier, and that's because of the move Tail Glow, which just so happens to be one of the best boosting moves in the game. Why, you might ask? Well, by using Tail Glow, you get an instant +3 in special attack, and it also has access to one of the best water-type moves in the game, Scald. It's also a relatively bulky Pokemon, as it has 100 in all of its defense stats. And since it's a water type, its defensive typing is also good. So a very bulky water type with access to an instant +3 in special attack and one of the best water moves in the game doesn't sound bad to me. It also has some pretty good coverage moves like Dazzling Gleam, Ice Beam, Energy Ball, Weather Ball if you wanted to try and run it on a Sun team. However, I don't know how beneficial it would be to put it on a Sun team, because it's still a water type and it would get all of its water type moves nerfed. So maybe not that one, but you could also be a little bit gimmicky with Heart Swap, which allows you to swap all of its boosts with whatever you're targeting, which could definitely come in handy in very specific situations. You could also potentially just give all of those boosts to Cali Shadow or Miraidon, so that both of them could be at +3, which sounds foul. And you're likely gonna want to pair it with a Follow Me user as well, just so that you can try to keep it as healthy as possible so it can continue to be annoying. Since it's already bulky and it's already doing a lot of damage, you do want it to stay on the field for as long as possible. So Follow Me could definitely be a great choice for that. And if you did want to run it on an actual good weather team, not the sun team that I mentioned earlier, you could put it on a rain team so that its ability, Hydration, would cure any statuses that it might incur during the battle, at the end of each turn, of course. Now its counterpart, Phione, this Pokemon doesn't exist. We're just putting it at F tier. Enough said. Now to keep the Deoxys attack and base forms company, we are going to go ahead and add Darkrai to B tier. Number 1, Darkrai is fast. Number 2, Dark Void, which is going to be the main reason that people are going to run Darkrai. Granted, in a Miraidon world, it is kind of getting walled because electric terrain wakes up all the Pokemon and also doesn't let them fall asleep. But outside of any Miraidon matchups, Dark Void is a huge problem. And in order to keep Dark Void being a huge problem, you're probably going to want to run some type of opposing terrain to get rid of electric terrain if you are finding yourself against a Miraidon. So things like Rillaboom and Indeedee are definitely going to be great partners for it. You definitely are going to want to run Darkrai with Gravity as well, since obviously Dark Void is not the most accurate move, and Gravity would boost its accuracy by 67%. So not 100% accurate, but still a much better chance of Dark Void hitting. That also means that item-wise, you're probably going to want to either run Darkrai with a Focus Sash or a Choice Scarf, and then probably like Icy Wind or Snarl as well. And on top of being annoying with Dark Void, he's also a pretty good special attacker and run things like Dark Pulse for stab or even some coverage moves like Sludge Bomb or Ice Beam. Now, unfortunately, our next friend, which is little Shaymin here, that's gonna go on F tier as well, because he sure is a Pokemon that's coded into the game. He could possibly be some type of Scarf special attacker, but there's just really not a lot of options there. Now, Shaymin Sky form is still not great, but a little bit better. We're gonna put this at D tier, just because its stat distribution is a little bit better. You do get the ability Serene Grace, so you could realistically run a set like Tailwind, Air Slash, and Seed Flare, just so you can double those chances of secondary effects, which would mean that Air Slash would now be like a 60% flinch rate, and Seed Flare would have like an 80% chance of lowering special defense by 2 stages. So you could either go like Focus Sash with Tailwind, so you can make sure that you get Tailwind up, or even like Choice Scarf with things like Air Slash, Seed Flare, Dazzling Gleam, and like Earth Power, which would also give you a lot of good coverage into majority of the meta. The downside is that his typing kind of sucks. He's flying in grass, so definitely more of a Terra Hog, but having the ability to have a very high likelihood of lowering your opponent's special defense with Seed Flare and sitting it next to a big special attacker like Miraidon or like Calyrex Shadow Rider would definitely be a good way to pick up some big KOs. So like, I don't know, like maybe it could be C tier. I think it's like in between, it's in between C and D for me. I'm gonna leave it at D, just because, like I said, its typing really sucks and it is a Terra Hog. And its partners would oftentimes also like to Terra, so it'd be kind of annoying to have to like pick and choose. I'm just gonna leave it at D just due to its typing, but realistically, it's in between for me. Now next we have Arceus. It's going at F tier. No, I'm kidding. It's going at S tier. Hello? Like I mentioned earlier, Arceus gets Extreme Speed. You can also give it Terra Normal and sit it next to Dragonite's biggest enabler, which will now be Arceus's biggest enabler, Chien-Pao. You could also give it a Choice Band, just like Dragonite. You could also give it Silk Scarf, Normal Gem, Clear Amulet so that you can't get intimidated. But because of Stab and Terra Normal, you're literally just going to be able to pick up like instant KOs from full HP, from neutral. Plus, Arceus has great synergy, literally just built in. Want to avoid getting extreme speeded yourself? Terra Ghost. And since he has his best friend Chien-Pao next to him, Chien-Pao keeps him safe from any opposing ghost types. And of course, you could also have a Calyrex Shadow Rider hiding in the back as well. And on top of that, if you're still scared of opposing ghost types, Arceus also has access to Shadow Claw, so you could simply just claw them. And what's even funnier is if your opponent tries to tear away from his weaknesses with say like Terra Steel or Rock, guess what Chien-Pao can run? Sacred Sword. And if you don't have a Chien-Pao anymore, you know what else you could sit next to Arceus? A Helping Hand user. That's not Indeedee, obviously, because terrain. and you'd still be doing the same amount of damage. And that's just base form normal type Arceus. What's even cooler about Arceus is he's the ultimate customize your character Pokemon because of the plates. For example, if you wanted to be really annoying, give Arceus an Earth Plate and Terra Fairy, and voila, you have a Ground and Fairy type Pokemon, which those two types work really well together because they cover for each other's weaknesses. And with Judgment and a move like Dazzling Gleam, you could see how that could be a problem. You could also do the opposite, and give it a Pixie Plate and Terra Ground. Once again, with Judgment and something like Earth Power, could also be a problem. Not to mention you also have other move slots for you to play around with. So you're scared of Zamazenta? You're now a Fire type with Heat Wave. Scared of Kali Shadow? You're now a Dark type with Snarl or Dark Pulse. And since we're on the latter, your opponent wouldn't even know if you were running a not normal type Arceus. Just looking at team preview, it would just be an Arceus. So realistically, it would be their best bet whether you're running normal Arceus or an Arceus holding a plate. You could also run a bulky Calm Mindset if you wanted to be more of a slow game player. Arceus also sings! Very deadly tune that I am very excited to try out myself. It does learn Perish Song. Or you could just go basic and run Sword Dance and Extreme Speed next to Follow Me. That way, it lets you invest more in your defenses and not as much into attack, so you would be able to live an opposing extreme speed from another Arceus and still hit extremely hard. At the end of the day, in this specific meta, if you're not playing against an Arceus, consider yourself lucky. And if you're not using Arceus, you may just be throwing. So what I'm getting at is that Arceus is not only going to be the god of Pokemon, lore-wise, but also the god of this meta. Now that I'm done glazing Arceus, next up we have Keldeo, and Keldeo is going in F tier. It's just not really doing anything. It's the same type as Urshifu, but Urshifu gets Surging Strikes. Whereas with Keldeo, you'd have to hope and pray that your Hydro Pump doesn't miss. The one thing that it does have is that you would be able to hit Zamazenta on the special side with the special fighting move Secret Sword. But Secret Sword also hits based off of your defense. So instead, you're also going to have to end up gambling with Focus Blast. It also just doesn't really have any great coverage, so I just don't really see how you would find an actual place for Keldeo on a team. Up next, we have Meloetta. Meloetta is going to go in D tier. Now, whoever actually made Meloetta decided to play two very cruel jokes on her. Number one, she's a psychic type that doesn't learn Expanding Force. And number two is they gave her a second form that you will quite literally never see because it requires the Aria form using the move Relic Song, which is a special move to get to the physical attacking Pirouette form, which will now only have 3 available move slots because you're not going to want to swap forms again. It does, however, have the plus side of being actual good typing into Calyrex Shadow Rider since it's also a normal type, but you do still have to deal with things like Incineroar. She also doesn't have the worst stats with 128 in Special and 100 in HP, so Hyper Voice with Throat Spray and Psychic could be good options for her, and maybe something like Focus Blast, Dazzling Gleam, Alluring Voice, and like Shadow Ball just for coverage. You could try out Calm Mind, and since she sings, she also learns Perish Song, so like you could probably find a small niche for her, like I said, into like Calyrex Shadow Rider. She's actually pretty helpful. But to take up a whole restricted slot just for a few matchups, is that really worth it? I don't know. Now this next girly pop, Diancie, is actually going to go ahead and go in C tier. When it comes to Diancie, she's pretty simple. You're probably going to want an Iron Defense and Body Press, or you could also be Diamond Storm and Body Press. Her defenses are already good, so boosting your defense by 2 stages would be very good. Its typing isn't like amazing defensively since it's Rock and Fairy, but it's not bad. And on top of that, you could also put a set together with like Calm Mind and run something like Moon Blast, Draining Kiss, Dazzling Gleam, and Diamond Storm, or something like Flash Cannon and Earth Power for coverage. Next, we have Little Hoopa. Hoopa Bounded. It's going in F tier. It has a weird speed. Its speed stat is 70, so it can like kind of work in Trick Room as an Expanding Force user, but there's just other Trick Room attackers that do the same thing but better, like Hatterene. Iron Crown can also do the exact same thing outside of Trick Room, and its typing is the same as Lunala's, but Lunala lives more. I mean, it does have Pure Power, but is that really enough? I don't think so. Now, Big Boy Hoopa, Hoopa Unbounded, he can go C tier. Its typing is better, and it has a higher special attack. It's also a little bit faster and stronger. When it comes to his moves, you're probably going to want to also be running Expanding Force on him. However, he also has a really cool move called Hyperspace Hole, which does break through Protect. So those are probably going to be the two main psychic moves you're going to want to be running. If you did want to run him in Trick Room, you could also make him mid-speed and have him hold an Iron Ball, especially if you wanted to do the whole Psy Spam thing, compare him with Indeedee. Or you could also run him with a physical set that also runs Hyperspace Hole so that you can still break Protect and then maybe some type of Dark type move. You could also train it so that you are outspeeding your partners in Trick Room so that you can break Protects for them. Or you could also run it with Scar so you can do that outside of Trick Room. That way you can pair it with things like Kali so that it can do big damage in Trick Room, Iron Hands, Ursaluna, or even things like Miraidon outside of Trick Room. So you can definitely do some interesting things with Hoopa Unbound. You just have to also think about a couple of things before you decide on what you're doing with it and able to actually pilot it effectively. Next up, we have Volcanion. And although I make fun of Volcanion because it does look like a baby rattle to me, it's gonna go in B tier. Its typing is actually pretty good defensively. It's actually really good into things like Chloridon, Kyogre, and Kali, as well as Ursaluna. It also helps that it has an immunity to water, since it has the ability Water Absorb, but it will of course be struggling against Miraidon. But in order to combat that, you could always give it Terra Ground and toss on an Assault Vest. And if you do that, he has the potential of being a really good Pokemon. It has the move Steam Eruption, which is a great move, as well as Scald, Flamethrower, Fire Blast, or Heat Wave for that Fire Stab, which is very important because there's not a lot of fire restricteds. There's also Earth Power for Stab if you're Terra Ground, which is a great answer into Miraidon as well, especially if for the last slot you give it a second fire type move, Overheat so that you're hitting super hard at least once, or Sledge Bomb for any opposing Terra Fairies. When it comes to Calyrex Shadow Rider, it doesn't really have a lot to hit into it, but with Assault Vest, you are able to take some good hits. And if you didn't want to go the Assault Vest route, you could always run things like Will-O-Wisp or Taunt, but then it wouldn't be as good in the restricted slot. So with answers into a lot of the big restricted attackers, as well as Miraidon once you Terra, I'd say he has the potential to be really good. Next, we have Magearna. Magearna is gonna go ahead and keep Arceus company, and that's because Soul Heart is absolutely broken. Magearna is going to love sitting next to things like Annihilate with Final Gambit, or things with Explosion, because the more Pokemon that faint, the more boosts Magearna gets. Of course, you're going to want to go ahead and protect your Magearna during the turn that you're exploding or using Final Gambit so that Magearna can also stay alive. But you could also give her Calm Mind to make her a little bit bulkier and also a little more attacky. And if instead of making her hit harder, you wanted to make her faster, you could always go the Gear Shift route so that you can get a +2 speed boost. Magearna can also Trick Room so that you're able to put in a Trick Room attacker that your opponent then has to deal with as well. And you could even do some funny Psych Up things if that's the kind of thing that you want to do. Moveset-wise, it does have access to things like Dazzling Gleam or Draining Kiss, Fleur Cannon, which is a big attack, Flash Cannon for steel coverage, and for even more coverage, you also get access to things like Thunderbolt, Energy Ball, and Stored Power, which Stored Power could obviously snowball. You might not have the best matchup into Incineroar since you wouldn't be able to hit it very hard, but you do have access to the move Focus Blast, or you could always Terra Water, and now Incineroar is not posing as big of a threat. But yeah, Magearna and Arceus are going to be like the two things that you see on every single team on the ladder moving forward. I'm sure you've noticed that I haven't put a singular Pokemon into A tier. That's to prove a point, and that point is how outclassed all of these other mythicals are so far, in comparison to Arceus and Magearna. Nothing even comes close to those two. They are both extremely broken. We're down to our last two Pokemon, and up next we have Zarude. Zarude don't really exist to me. It's gonna go in F tier. If you're picking Zarude, I'm sure you're probably picking it because of jungle healing. But if you wanted to heal, you could do that with a lot of other non-restricted Pokemon. I guess like in addition to that, you do have Knockoff and like Drain Punch for coverage, which that's cool, but it's just the typing issue. You know what also has the same typing, but its ability makes it a much better partner for its allies? Wo-Chen. You could also go with Brute Bonnet, who gets Spore, Rage Powder, and loves Sun teams. You could even be quirky and like, there's Shift-Free, Cacturn, also Meowscarada, which gets Sucker Punch, which Cacturn would be better against like a Sand team. Shiftry just zooms after Tailwind. And Meowscarada has a signature move that never misses and always crits. And like I said, none of these Pokemon take up a restricted slot. So, I'm sorry, Zarude. So many other Pokemon do things much better than you and don't take up a whole important slot on the team. but I liked your movie. The movie was good. Now last but not least, we have Pecharunt, our newest mythical that was introduced in Scarlet and Violet. Pecharunt is going in C tier. When it comes to Pecharunt, you're probably looking at stall, potentially putting it next to something like Galapagos if Terra Starstorm's not doing enough damage, so you're able to set up Poison Gas with Pecharunt for the extra chip, and then you have Poison Puppeteer, which means that your opponent also has to work through Confusion. You could also pair its poisoning with like Poison Gas, Toxic, or its actual signature ability, Malignant Chain, with Stab, Hex, which would mean that you would then have a pretty good ghost type move. And then it also gets access to Recover. And of course, you'd probably want to give it the Leftovers item, which means that not only would it be annoying by chipping down its opponents, confusing them, potentially hitting them pretty hard with a ghost type move, but it would also be sticking around on the field for quite a long time. With that said, you are committing to a very long game, so you're probably also going to want to put it behind screens and some type of setup sweeper. But it's definitely happiest stalling, and probably paired with like Dondozo. You're definitely going to want to have a lot of patience if you want to run this specific Pokemon. You could also run a defensive Terra on it like Terra Dark, since Terra Dark works really well with its specific typing. That way, since you are running a stall set, which of course requires a lot of status moves, you would be able to avoid any Prankster Encores, taunts, and then it would also oppose any opposing ghost types like Calyrex Shadow Rider, since you would now be a dark type, and would also be immune to Expanding Force users. And I highly doubt that anybody is going to immediately be launching any type of fighting moves into this Pokemon. So you definitely have the potential to, like I said, stick around, be really annoying, and of course cover for your weaknesses. Remember, like I said, the longer you're on the field, the more likely you are to be crit. For that reason, it is going to be at the bottom of C tier, because it is going to be a very long game, and it's going to be very dependent on how long you're able to keep Pecharunt alive. But there you have it. That is all of my thoughts on the now legal mythicals in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Clearly, I'm very biased, and I will obviously be running any type of Arceus and Magearna teams, possibly Deoxys as well. But let me know what mythicals you're planning on using and why. But that is going to go ahead and wrap it up for this very long-winded video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, I kindly suggest that you consider subscribing so that I can continue to make content for you guys. And if you were already subscribed and you would like another way to support the channel, feel free to check out the merch store. There is a link down below in the description that takes you to not only my merch store, but also all of my other socials, so you can keep up with what I'm doing on a daily basis. But thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you to those of you who have joined the channel as members. I appreciate you all so much. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys!